The C-130 transport plane roared across the Afghan sky, its engines rattling like distant thunder. Inside the dimly lit cargo bay, soldiers sat strapped into their seats, their eyes heavy from exhaustion and dust. The men wore the look of people who had seen enough combat to grow numb to it. Yet today, something different had caught their attention. Seated among them was a woman, her posture straight, her hands folded across a sniper rifle case. Her presence was unusual enough to stir curiosity. Some stared openly, others whispered behind half smiles. The air carried a tension she could feel pressing against her skin. Her name was Sergeant Alexandra Hayes, though few called her that. Back home, she was known as Lex, the quiet sharpshooter who could outshoot most of her instructors in training. Out here, however, names mattered little. What mattered was whether you could survive. And for now, survival meant earning the trust of men who didn't believe she belonged. The plane touched down with a bone-jarring thud, sending helmets rattling against the steel walls. Dust billowed as the ramp lowered, revealing the vast, sunburnt mountains of Afghanistan. The soldiers filed out, their boots crunching on gravel. Alexandra followed in silence, the desert heat slamming into her chest like a furnace. At the edge of the airstrip, a group of Navy SEALs waited, their uniforms dusty, but their stance sharp. Leading them stood Commander Richard Mallory, a man with the carved face of someone who had survived more firefights than most would ever dream of. His reputation preceded him, ruthless in training, relentless in combat, and brutally honest. In his assessments of those under his command, his eyes narrowed the moment they fell on her. "So this is the sniper they sent us?" Mallory muttered, not bothering to hide his skepticism. His words carried just enough volume for the others to hear. "Great. Washington's experiments keep getting bolder." The SEALs chuckled, some outright grinning, others hiding their amusement behind coughs. Alexandra said nothing. She adjusted the strap on her rifle case and locked eyes with Mallory. She didn't flinch, didn't smirk. Her silence was steady, unnerving even, but the commander dismissed it with a shake of his head. As the convoy of Humvees rumbled toward the forward operating base, the men's banter grew louder. "Maybe she's here to keep the paperwork straight, or to hand out cookies. I bet she's never had sand in her boots." The words bounced around, like stones in a tin can. Alexandra sat in the corner of the vehicle, her gaze fixed on the barren landscape rushing past, the jagged ridges, the dry riverbeds, the villages clinging to survival. She let the chatter roll over her. After years of training and deployments, she had grown used to doubt. Every insult was kindling, every sneer another log on the fire inside her. When they arrived at the base, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the compound. Soldiers moved with practiced urgency, carrying supplies, checking weapons, preparing for another night where danger could come from any direction. The SEALs dispersed, but Mallory lingered near the gate, watching Alexandra unload her gear. "Listen. Up, Sergeant," he said, his voice low but edged like a blade. "This isn't a proving ground. Out here, mistakes get people killed. I don't care what your records say back in the States. If you screw up, if you hesitate even once, you'll bury this entire unit. Understand?" She met his gaze without blinking. "Understood, sir." Something in her tone, calm, controlled, without a hint of defiance, seemed to irritate him further. He expected nerves, maybe excuses. Instead, he found steel. He turned away, muttering something about dead. Wait. That night, Alexandra was given a corner bunk in a room crowded with cots. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. A few men nodded at her politely. Most ignored her. The commander's doubts had already shaped their opinions. As the others slept, she sat cross-legged on her cot, carefully unpacking her rifle. Piece by piece, she cleaned it with meticulous precision, oiling the bolt, adjusting the scope, running her fingers over the barrel, as if reacquainting herself with an old friend. Each movement was deliberate, ritualistic. For her, the rifle wasn't just a weapon, it was her voice, her argument, her proof. Outside, the desert wind howled, carrying with it the distant echo of gunfire. She paused for a moment, listening. She thought of home, of her father who had taught her to shoot on quiet weekends in the woods, of the instructors who had doubted her until she shattered their records. She thought of the women who came before her, who fought twice as hard for half the recognition. And she thought of the commander's words, that she was a mistake, a liability, a risk. Her jaw tightened. She didn't need his approval. What she needed was a target. The next morning, training drills began. The unit gathered at the range, rifles lined up on the sandbags. Mallory barked orders, his voice carrying over the din of gunfire. When it came time for her turn, the men leaned back, waiting for the experiment to falter. She lay prone, adjusting her scope with steady hands. 3 targets, 300 meters out. The wind shifted slightly. She calculated the angle without thinking, her mind running the math automatically. Crack. The first target dropped. Crack. The second. Crack. The third. 3 shots. 3 hits. The steel plates echoed across the range like bells. For a brief moment, a line of SEALs fell silent. A few exchanged glances. Mallory said nothing. He scribbled something on his notepad and moved on, refusing to acknowledge what they had all just witnessed. But Alexandra didn't care. She hadn't come here for applause. She had come here to fight, to protect, to prove that her presence was not a mistake. That night, as the base settled under the weight of another uncertain evening, the whispers grew quieter. Some men began to watch her differently, not with respect yet, but with something resembling curiosity. The commander, however, remained unmoved, his skepticism as unshakable as the mountains surrounding them. Alexandra welcomed it. The more he doubted her, the sweeter it would be when she proved him wrong. For now, she waited. The battlefield would come soon enough, and when it did, her rifle would do the talking. The first week at the forward operating base unfolded like a slow grind. Days bled into each other heat, baking the earth by day, icy winds clawing through the night. The men carried themselves with the weary confidence of those who had survived. Too long in a place where survival itself was a small victory. For Alexandra Hayes, the rhythm was new yet familiar. She had endured training camps, weapons courses, and endless days of proving herself to skeptical instructors. But here, the stakes were different. This wasn't a school where missing a shot meant a poor grade. Here, mistakes meant body bags. And in the eyes of her commander, she was already one step away from causing one. Commander Mallory wasted no time setting the tone. Every briefing, every drill, he made it clear she was an outsider. He rarely addressed her directly. When he did, it was with clipped words, as though speaking to someone whose comprehension he doubted. On the third morning, during a tactical exercise, he barked orders to the team. Cover fire from the ridge. 2 teams flank left, 2 right. Hayes, he hesitated, a pause long enough to feel intentional. You just stay on overwatch. Don't get in the way. The men snickered. Alexandra's face betrayed nothing. She simply nodded, slinging her rifle and heading for this ridge. Up top, she scanned the terrain, her scope sweeping across hills and shadowed valleys. She spotted what the others missed, an angle where an enemy ambush could easily set up. She radioed it in, calm and direct. Mallory's reply came back, curt and dismissive. Noted. Stay focused on your lane. When the exercise ended, the commander gathered the men. He praised their flanking speed, criticized their spacing, and said nothing of her observation. As the soldiers dispersed, one muttered just loud enough, maybe she should stick to watching sunsets instead of ridges. Laughter rippled through the group. That night, in the chow hall, the atmosphere thickened. Soldiers ate hunched over metal trays, conversations drifting from supply shortages to the day's drills. Alexandra sat at the far end, alone. She had grown used to isolation, but the whispers carried easily across the small space. She's just here because some senator wants headlines. Yeah, politics in uniform. She won't last a month. Alexandra kept her eyes on her food. She knew better than to rise to the bait. Words meant little. Results meant everything. And sooner or later, the desert would give her a chance to prove herself. A chance came sooner than expected. On the 5th day, the unit headed out for a routine patrol through a cluster of villages nestled in the valley. It was meant to be quiet shake hands with locals, keep presence known, deter insurgents by simply existing. Mallory rode up front, scanning the horizon with the intensity of a man who had learned never to trust a quiet day. Alexandra sat in the rear Humvee, rifle across her lap. The road wound through dusty alleys and mud brick houses. Children, darting in and out of doorways, their laughter mingling with the low growl of engines. She caught glimpses of wary faces, men watching from rooftops, women pulling scarves tighter. The village seemed still, but the stillness made her uneasy. Her instincts sharpened as they approached the far edge of the settlement. Something in the air shifted, too quiet, too staged. Through her scope, she caught a glint on a distant hillside. A rifle barrel, hidden but not enough. Possible contact, 2 o'clock ridge line, she radioed in. Mallory's reply snapped back immediately. Hold position. Probably just. Sunlight on rock. Stay sharp. Her finger hovered near the trigger, but she obeyed. Moments later, gunfire erupted. Bullets pinged against metal. Dirt kicked up in violent bursts. The convoy lurched to a halt, soldiers diving for cover. From her vantage, Alexandra zeroed in. The rifle barrel fired again, giving away the sniper's nest. She didn't wait for permission. Breath steady, scope aligned, she squeezed the trigger. The insurgent dropped, rolling lifeless down the slope. The sudden silence after the shot was deafening. The ambush crumbled quickly without their sniper. The attackers scattered. The SEALs pressed forward, securing the area with practiced aggression. When the smoke cleared, they regrouped. Mallory walked up to Alexandra, his jaw tight. Who gave you the order to fire? He demanded. She met his glare calmly. No. One, sir, but if I hadn't, we'd have body bags right now. For a moment, it seemed he might explode. But he only stared at her, his silence heavy. Then he turned away, barking new orders. The men exchanged glances, some with grudging respect, others with renewed skepticism. That night, back at the base, the whispers took on a new tone. She did drop him clean. Got lucky, that's all. Even a broken clock's right twice a day. Mallory, for his part, ignored the event in his debrief. He spoke of effective maneuvering and tight formation, but her kill was erased from the record as if it hadn't happened. Alexandra sat alone on her bunk, cleaning her rifle under the dim glow of a lantern. Each swipe of the cloth across the barrel felt like an answer to their doubts. She wasn't there for glory. She wasn't there to change minds with speeches. She was there for the men who might live because of her scope. Still, the sting of dismissal cut deep. She had saved them, and yet, in the eyes of the commander, she remained nothing more than a risk, a distraction, a burden. As she reassembled the rifle, she whispered under her breath, a vow only the steel could hear. One shot at a time. That's how I'll prove it. The desert, she knew, would test them all again soon. And when it did, she would be ready not for their approval, but for survival. And in that survival, respect would come, whether they wanted it to or not. The night before the mission, the base seemed unnervingly still. The air was heavy, the desert winds carrying only faint whispers of dust across the compound. Alexandra Hayes sat on her cot, dismantling and cleaning her rifle with the focus of a surgeon preparing for an operation. Each click of metal against metal calmed her. Each polished groove reminded her that, when the time came, she wouldn't hesitate. Her fellow soldiers spoke in hushed tones across the room. They were seasoned SEALs men, bonded by months of blood, sweat, and fire. She was the outsider, tolerated at best, mocked at worst. The commander had barely acknowledged her during the briefing, assigning her to overwatch like a piece of equipment rather than a soldier. "Hayes," Mallory had said, his voice hard as stone, "you stay back. Cover the team. Don't overthink it. Don't screw it up." That was all. No encouragement. No trust. Just a warning disguised as an order. She accepted it without protest. If anything, Overwatch was where she belonged. High ground, scope, silence, that was her world. Out there. She wouldn't need their acceptance. Out there, her rifle would speak for her. Dawn broke pale and unforgiving, washing the mountains in harsh light. The unit set out in armored Humvees, engines rumbling over broken dirt roads. Dust clouds followed. In their wake, hanging in the air like ghosts. Alexandra sat in the rear vehicle, her sniper rifle resting across her knees. Her eyes never stopped scanning the jagged ridges that loomed over them. The mission was straightforward on paper. Sweep through a suspected insurgent supply route, secure the valley, and return to base. But paper missions never survived contact with reality. As they approached a narrow pass, Alexandra felt the tension coil tighter. The valley seemed too quiet, the ridges too still. She adjusted her scope, scanning shadows between rocks. Nothing. And yet, something wasn't right. The convoy halted. The lead vehicle scanned the path ahead for IEDs, while the rest of the team dismounted, weapons at the ready. Alexandra climbed onto a rocky outcrop, finding her position with practiced ease. She exhaled slowly, letting the world shrink down to the circle of glass in her scope. That was when she saw it, a flicker of light on a distant ridge. The unmistakable glint of a scope reflecting the sun. Her pulse quickened, but her breathing stayed calm. She had trained for this moment 1,000 times. "Sniper, northeast ridge, 700 meters, she whispered into her radio. Mallory's voice crackled back, clipped and skeptical. "Are you sure, Hayes? Could be glare. Hold your fire until confirmed." Her teeth clenched. She was sure. Years of training, endless drills, her instincts screamed the truth. But she obeyed, keeping her finger off the trigger. The confirmation came a heartbeat later. A single shot cracked across the valley. The bullet slammed into the hood of the lead Humvee, sparking metal and forcing the driver to dive for cover. Chaos erupted. Insurgent gunfire poured down from the ridges, bullets hammering the dirt around them. The SEALs scattered, returning fire, their shouts drowned by the storm of gunfire. Mallory barked orders, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Alexandra didn't wait for another command. She shifted her rifle, found the glint again. The enemy sniper had repositioned, lining up for another kill. She steadied her breathing, slowed her heartbeat, and let the world fade until only the scope and the target remained. Crack. The enemy sniper's body jerked back violently, tumbling down the rocks until it vanished from sight. For a second, silence seemed to cut through the chaos. The barrage slowed, the insurgents realizing their cover fire was gone. Alexandra didn't hesitate. She swung her scope to the left, picking off another gunman trying to flank the unit. Crack. He dropped. The SEALs used the opening to push forward, returning fire with ruthless precision. Within minutes, the ambush collapsed, insurgents retreating into the mountains, their fire thinning until only silence remained. When the dust finally settled, the unit regrouped at the convoy. Soldiers panted, wiping sweat and grime from their faces. 2 men had taken minor wounds, but everyone was alive. Alive because of her. She climbed down from her position, rifle slung across her shoulder. Eyes followed her as she approached, some filled with disbelief, others with grudging respect. For once, no one joked, no one sneered. Mallory, however, stood stiff, his jaw set like granite. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You broke orders," he said flatly. "I saved lives," Alexandra replied, her voice calm, almost cold. The silence that followed was heavy. Some soldiers shifted uncomfortably, waiting for Mallory's explosion. But it never came. He simply gave a curt nod and turned away, barking for the team to mount up. Back at the base, the story spread quickly. Around the chow tables and in the barracks, men replayed the moment, the clean shot, the way she dropped. The enemy sniper, before anyone else had even lined up their sights. Some muttered about luck. Others admitted, albeit quietly, that without her, the mission could have ended in disaster. But Mallory remained unmoved. In the debrief, he spoke only of tactical adjustments, glossing over her kill as though it had been just another bullet in the firefight. He refused to give her the recognition the others were starting to whisper about. That night, Alexandra sat outside her quarters, the desert stretching endlessly under the starlit sky. Her rifle rested across her knees as she replayed the battle in her mind. The rush of calm she had felt while pulling the trigger still lingered, a reminder of why she was there. She didn't need Mallory's praise. She didn't need their applause. What mattered was the 2 soldiers who had gone home alive instead of in body bags. What mattered was that, in the chaos of gunfire, she had proven to herself and to them that she belonged. The war would demand more of her. She knew this was only the beginning. Doubts and whispers wouldn't vanish overnight. But she had fired her first shot in combat, and it had struck true. And deep down, even the commander, for all his pride and denial, knew it. Because in that moment on the ridge, when lives hung in the balance, the woman they had doubted had carried the weight of the entire unit on her trigger finger. And she had not missed. The firefight in the valley had changed something in the air. No one said it out loud, not yet, but Alexandra Hayes could feel it. Eyes lingered on her longer than before, no longer dripping with mockery, but with calculation. The men who once dismissed her now wondered what else she could do. But respect in a combat zone wasn't won in a single shot. It had to be earned again and again, mission after mission, until there was no room left for doubt. Alexandra knew that. And the desert was more than willing to test her. The next operation came 3 days later. The unit was tasked with clearing a compound believed to house weapons caches. Intelligence suggested a small cell of insurgents, but everyone knew small was a word that often meant ambush. They moved before dawn, the sky a dull gray canvas stretched over jagged peaks. Alexandra took her place on overwatch as usual, climbing to a crumbling rooftop overlooking the compound. Her rifle was steady, her scope sweeping the horizon. The entry team stacked by the gate, Mallory at the front. His hand signals cut through the dust, sharp and deliberate. On his mark, the breacher set the charge. The explosion tore the wooden gate apart, and the team poured in. Gunfire erupted immediately. Shadows darted through doorways, muzzle flashes sparking in the gloom. Alexandra's scope snapped to a figure aiming an RPG at the entry team. She exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger. The man dropped before he could fire. Seconds later, she picked off another, this one on the roof of an adjoining building, spraying bullets recklessly at her team. Crack, another body fell. Inside the compound, the SEALs pushed room to room, clearing with mechanical precision. But it was Alexandra's cover fire that thinned the chaos. Each shot a thread pulled from the enemy's defense, until it unraveled completely. When the dust settled, they had secured the weapons and taken the compound with minimal injuries. As they regrouped, one of the younger SEALs muttered, almost in awe, "She saved our asses in there?" Mallory's reply was immediate, sharp. She did her job. Don't start writing fairy tales. The men fell silent, but the seed had been planted. Word spread quickly, as it always did. Around campfires, in the mess hall, her name started to creep into stories. Hayes nailed 2 from the roof. Hayes spotted the RPG before it fired. Hayes doesn't miss. She didn't join the conversations. Instead, she spent her nights cleaning her rifle, writing in her small leather journal, and studying maps of upcoming patrols. Her world was measured in distance, wind speed, and angles. She didn't need their chatter. She needed results. And the results kept coming. On the next patrol, they were ambushed near a dry riverbed. Insurgents fired from concealed trenches, pinning the convoy. Alexandra scrambled to higher ground, bullets snapping past her as she dropped behind a rock. She adjusted her scope and picked off 3 targets in rapid succession, each shot clearing space for her team to maneuver. Target down, left trench. 2 down, right flank, clear to advance. Her calm updates over comms became the lifeline of the unit. Men who once rolled their eyes now clung to her words, trusting that if Hayes said a path was clear, it was clear. By the time the ambush collapsed, her confirmed kills had risen to 8. 8 men who would never fire another round. 8 fewer threats to the brothers who had doubted her. That night, one of the SEALs, a burly sergeant named Donnelly, approached her in the chow hall. He sat across from her, shoving a tray of food toward her with a nod. "Hell of a shot today," he said gruffly. "Twice over. You probably saved my hide." She looked up, meeting his eyes. For the first time since her arrival, there was no mockery in his expression, just respect. She gave a small nod. "Just doing my job." "Yeah," he said, a half-smile, tugging at his lips. "Well, keep doing it." Others began to follow. A nod here, a pat on the shoulder there. Slowly, grudgingly, the walls of doubt began to crack. But Mallory? Mallory was granite. In briefings, he still referred to her kills as lucky shots. In debriefs, he credited team coordination rather than her overwatch. When men praised her within earshot, his silence cut sharper than his words. One evening, after a particularly brutal skirmish where Alexandra had dropped 4 targets from impossible distances, she overheard Mallory speaking to his second-in-command. "She's good," he admitted quietly, his voice carrying through the thin canvas walls of the tent. "But I don't like it. The more they depend on her, the more dangerous it gets if she ever cracks." Alexandra sat outside, polishing her rifle in the fading light. She felt no anger, no sting, just resolve. She didn't need him to like it. She just needed to keep pulling the trigger. Her reputation grew with every mission. 12 confirmed kills, then 15. Each one added weight to her presence. Soldiers who once joked about babysitting her now asked her opinion before moving into unfamiliar terrain. Her voice on the radio became as steadying as Mallory's commands. Still, the commander's pride stood in the way. He couldn't deny her results, but he refused to let her overshadow his authority. For every success, he found a way to temper it with warnings. "Don't get cocky, Hayes. Skill means nothing without discipline. One mistake, and it all comes crashing down." She accepted it all in silence, because she knew the truth. Mistakes were what she couldn't afford. Out here, mistakes weren't hers to make. Weeks passed, missions blurred together, and her legend began to form. At 20 confirmed kills, whispers grew louder. She's setting records, some said. No one's ever done it like this. But for Alexandra, it wasn't about records. It was about survival. About the men who went home alive because her bullet had found its mark first. Still, in the quiet moments, as she wrote in her journal under dim lantern light, she wondered how long it would take for the commander to see what the others already did. Maybe he never would. Maybe pride was thicker than respect. But one thing was certain. Whether he admitted it or not, his men were no longer laughing. They were looking up to her, depending on her, trusting her. And in the unforgiving deserts of Afghanistan, trust was everything. The desert had a way of stripping men down to their essence. Out here, where survival balanced on a hair trigger, arrogance usually didn't last long. But Commander Richard Mallory was different. He had earned his pride through years of fire and blood. He had led men through firefights that chewed through platoons, and he had buried too many soldiers to count. Pride wasn't just vanity for him. It was armor. And Alexandra Hayes, with a rising reputation, was chipping away at it one kill at a time. By now, she was more than a rumor. Her name traveled faster than bullets. 17 confirmed kills. All clean, all vital. In briefings, soldiers sat straighter when she spoke. On patrols, they glanced at her for reassurance, not just Mallory. The shift was subtle but undeniable, and Mallory felt it. During one morning briefing, the team huddled around a battered map, the smell of instant coffee mixing with gun oil. Mallory pointed at a marked village. Intel says this is a resupply hub. We move in at dawn. Sweep, clear, extract. Standard procedure. Questions? Silence hung until Donnelly cleared his throat. Sir, with respect, maybe Hayes should have. High ground before we breach. Her overwatch saved us last time? Several heads nodded. Mallory's eyes flicked toward Alexandra, then back to Donnelly. His jaw tightened. She have her position, he said curtly. Don't get soft on me, Donnelly. One good shot doesn't make her infallible. Donnelly's face reddened, but he bit back his reply. Alexandra said nothing, though she felt the weight of the commander's words press against her like sandbags. The mission confirmed what everyone already suspected. As the unit breached the compound, insurgents poured from hidden tunnels, their ambush swift and violent. Mallory barked orders, his men fighting with practiced fury. From her perch on a rooftop, Alexandra's scope danced from target to target. Crack. One down. Crack. Another collapsed. Crack. A machine gun nest silenced before it shredded the courtyard. By the time the dust cleared, 5 of the enemy had fallen to her rifle. 5 men who would have killed her brothers in arms had she hesitated for even a heartbeat. When the team regrouped, bruised but alive, it was Donnelly who muttered, "Hell, she's not just good. She's the reason we're still standing." Others murmured in agreement. Even the skeptics couldn't ignore the truth any longer. But Mallory remained stone-faced. In his debrief, he spoke of team cohesion and adaptive tactics. Alexandra's name never crossed his lips. That night, the campfire crackled low, the flames reflecting off weary faces. The men swapped stories in hushed voices, laughter breaking through the fatigue. Alexandra sat nearby, silent as always, but listening. "She nailed 5 today," one whispered. "5. You believe that? Clean as hell. She's got ice in her veins." It was admiration, pure and simple. But admiration in war could be dangerous. Too much focus on one person threatened the chain of command, and Mallory knew it. Later, as the men drifted to their bunks, Mallory approached her. His shadow cut across the firelight, his expression hard. "You're getting comfortable," he said. She looked up, her hand still busy cleaning her rifle. "No, sir. Just doing my job." "Your job," he repeated, almost mocking. "Your job is to cover this team, not to become their savior. Don't mistake luck for skill. Out here, luck runs out fast." Her eyes lifted to meet his. Calm, steady. "With respect, sir, skill is why they're alive, not luck." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and unyielding. Then Mallory turned and walked away, his boots crunching on the gravel. The commander's resistance grew sharper as her reputation swelled. In training drills, he nitpicked her form. Too slow on the reload, scope adjustment off by a second. "Your angle leaves you exposed." The men noticed. They exchanged uneasy glances, but said nothing. Speaking against the commander, outright, was unthinkable. Still, the whispers in the barracks grew. He's got it out for her. Jealous, maybe? No, Mallory doesn't get jealous, but he doesn't like being outshined. Alexandra ignored it all. She didn't need to win the argument. She just needed to keep winning on the battlefield. Another mission, another test. This time, they moved into a canyon notorious for ambushes. As they advanced, gunfire erupted from the cliffs above, echoing like thunder in the narrow pass. Trapped, pinned down, the unit dove for cover. Alexandra scrambled up the rocks, dirt cutting into her palms, rifle strapped across her back. She reached a ledge, flattened herself, and peered through her scope. Targets appeared like phantoms against the cliffs. She dropped them one by one, her shots ringing out like punctuation in the chaos. 3 down, right ridge clear, she shouted over combs. 2 left, east side, suppressed. Her calm precision broke the ambush wide open, allowing Mallory and the others to push forward. By the end, 6 more kills were credited to her scope. When they regrouped, Donnelly slapped her shoulder. "Damn fine shooting, Hayes. You saved." U.S. again. But Mallory, his face streaked with dust and sweat, merely growled, "Don't celebrate. One slip and it's over. Don't let her fool you into thinking she's flawless." The men exchanged looks. This wasn't caution anymore. It was denial. Back at base, Alexandra sat alone, writing in her journal by lantern light. Her words were simple, almost clinical. 6 confirmed. East Ridge, narrow canyon. Saved 2 from machine gun fire. She paused, tapping the pen against the page. Then, softer, "The commander will never admit it. That doesn't matter. What matters is the men. They're starting to see me, not as an outsider. As one of them." She closed the book and laid back, staring at the canvas ceiling. She knew Mallory's resistance wasn't just about her. It was about control, authority, the unspoken fear that the men would look to her instead of him when the bullets started flying. And maybe, just maybe, he was right to fear it. Because in the crucible of war, respect wasn't commanded. It was earned. And Alexandra Hayes was earning it 1 shot at a time. The tension reached a breaking point 2 weeks later. Another ambush. Another firefight. Another series of clean kills by Hayes. As the men regrouped, battered but alive, Donnelly finally spoke what everyone was thinking. "Sir, with respect, we'd be dead 3 times over without her. You can't keep calling it luck." Mallory's eyes flashed. For a moment, Alexandra thought he might tear into Donnelly on the spot. But instead, he turned sharply, his voice cold as steel. "Fall in, we move." The men obeyed, but the crack in his authority had shown. And Alexandra knew then that Mallory's resistance wasn't just stubbornness. It was desperation, a fight against the inevitable. Because, no matter how hard he pushed back, her reputation was no longer just growing. It was unstoppable. The sun rose like fire over the desert horizon, painting the jagged mountains in shades of crimson and gold. It was the kind of morning that carried an omen, too quiet, too still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Alexandra. Hayes adjusted her rifle strap, scanning the distant ridges as the team prepared for departure. She felt it in her gut. Today was going to be different. Their mission briefing was short but heavy. A high-value target had been spotted in a fortified village nestled deep in the valley. Intelligence claimed the site doubled as a command hub, coordinating dozens of insurgent attacks across the province. Taking it down would cripple the enemy. But everyone knew what it really meant. Walking straight into the lion's den. Mallory laid out the plan with clipped precision. We move in under cover of night, breach from the south, and extract fast. Hayes, Overwatch East Ridge, eyes open, no mistakes. His tone was flat, but the weight behind the words was unmistakable. This wasn't a mission for errors. It was the kind where one wrong step ended with flag-draped coffins. Night cloaked the valley as they approached, the only sounds the crunch of boots and the occasional rustle of gear. Alexandra moved ahead, climbing the east ridge with practice. Silence. At the summit, she dropped to her stomach, unfolded her bipod, and set her rifle into position. A moonlight painted the village below in ghostly silver. Through her scope, she could see the faint glow of lanterns inside the compound, shadows moving in the courtyards. More than shadows. Armed men. Dozens of them. Her pulse slowed as she adjusted her scope, marking targets, calculating wind and distance. Overwatch set, she whispered into comms. Copy, Mallory replied. Stand by. The team crept toward the village. At Mallory's signal, the breacher placed a charge against the outer gate. The explosion tore the silence. Apart, fire and dust erupting as the SEALs stormed inside. Gunfire erupted instantly, sharp cracks echoing through the valley. Insurgents poured from doorways, rifles blazing, shouts echoing in the night. Alexandra exhaled, steady and calm. The world narrowed to the circle of her scope. Crack. One insurgent fell from a rooftop. Before he could fire, an RPG. Crack. Another. Collapsed at the gate, his rifle slipping from his hands. Crack. A machine gunner on the balcony slumped forward, silenced before he could pin down the entry team. Her comms came alive with frantic voices. Contact left. Multiple shooters. Sniper, second story, west building. Alexandra swung her scope, heart steady, finger squeezing. Crack. The sniper's head snapped back, body crumpling from the window. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She became rhythm, breathe, aim, fire. Breathe, aim, fire. Inside the compound, chaos reigned. Insurgents surged from hidden tunnels, firing wildly, determined to overwhelm the intruders. But each time they gained an inch, Alexandra's bullets stole it back. East alley clear, she reported calmly. Courtyard secure. Move forward. The men trusted her voice without question now. Every shot gave them room to breathe, to push, to survive. One insurgent broke from the shadows with a suicide vest strapped to his chest. He sprinted toward the SEALs, shouting. Alexandra's scope locked on his chest. Crack. He fell mid-stride, detonator slipping harmlessly from his grasp. Threat neutralized, she whispered, her voice steadier than she felt. Minutes bled into an eternity. Her kill count rose. 6, 7, 8. Sweat trickled down her spine, but her hands never faltered. Then, through her scope, she saw it. A mounted machine gun being dragged into position on the far ridge, aimed directly at her team. Too far for most shooters. Too fast. But Alexandra wasn't most shooters. She adjusted her scope, calculated the wind, steadied her breath. Crack. The gunner dropped before his finger touched the trigger. The machine gun clattered harmlessly. Against the rocks. Clear. Keep moving. Mallory's voice cut in over comms, sharp but different this time, not dismissive. Urgent. Hayes, I need eyes on that north roof, now. She swung her scope, found 3 figures aiming down at Mallory's squad. Crack, crack, crack. All 3 collapsed before they fired a shot. The comms were silent for a moment. Then Mallory's voice, quieter, almost grudging. Good work. The firefight stretched into an hour, and longer. By the time the last insurgent fell, the village was still, smoke rising from shattered walls. The SEALs regrouped in the courtyard, battered but alive. Alexandra climbed down from her perch, boots crunching on gravel as she approached. Her rifle was heavy across her chest, her body drained, but her eyes were sharp. Donnelly turned as she entered the courtyard. His face, streaked with dirt and sweat, broke into a grin. 12, he said, almost in awe. 12 confirmed tonight. I counted. The others glanced at her, their expressions the same. Respect, admiration, even relief. Men who had once mocked her now looked at her like a shield they couldn't live without. Mallory stood apart, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he just stared at her, his jaw clenched. Then he gave the faintest nod. Not approval, not surrender. Just acknowledgement. It was more than she'd ever expected. Back at base, the numbers spread like wildfire. 12 kills in one mission. 29 confirmed total. A record. The kind of story that didn't stay contained within a single unit. At the campfire that night, the men retold the mission in hushed voices. She dropped a suicide bomber mid-run. Took out a machine gun nest before it fired a round. 3 snipers in seconds. Alexandra sat nearby, listening silently as she always did. She didn't bask in it, didn't seek their praise. She just wrote it down in her journal. Mission complete. 12 confirmed. Commander acknowledged. The team survived. She paused, pen hovering, then added, Today, they stopped seeing me as a woman. They saw me as a soldier. Nothing more, nothing less. The mission had changed everything. Not just for Alexandra Hayes, but for the entire unit. The jokes were gone. The doubts were gone. Even Mallory's resistance, though unspoken, had softened. Under the weight of undeniable truth. In the crucible of war, Alexandra had carved her name into legend. And though the battles ahead would test her further, one fact was now set in stone. She was no longer an outsider. She was the sniper who had broken every expectation, every record, and every barrier. And no one could ever take that away. The compound was quiet now, but silence after battle was never peaceful. It was heavy, almost oppressive, carrying the echoes of gunfire and the memory of lives cut short. The SEALs moved through the village like shadows, double-checking corners, securing stragglers, and gathering intelligence. Alexandra Hayes walked among them, her rifle still cradled in her arms, but the men treated her differently. They gave her space, yes, but not distance. Where once there had been doubt and mockery, now there was respect, palpable and unspoken. Donnelly broke the quiet first. 12, he muttered again, as if still convincing himself it was real. She dropped 12 in one night. The younger men glanced at Alexandra, waiting for her to bask in the glory, to smirk or boast. But she just knelt in the dust, stripping her rifle with the same calm focus she always had. Her hands moved methodically, cleaning the barrel, checking the chamber, tightening every screw. It wasn't 12, she said finally, her voice low. It was 12 threats, that's all. And if I'd missed one, we wouldn't be standing here. The words silenced them more than boasting ever could. Back at base, reports had to be filed. Numbers had to be logged. Mallory sat at his desk, pen scratching across paper. His jaw was tight, his back rigid, the lamplight casting hard shadows across his face. He paused more than once, staring at the empty line where her name belonged. 29 confirmed kills. 12 in one mission. It was beyond exceptional. It was unprecedented. Men in his position would have written it proudly, knowing it would elevate the unit's reputation. But for Mallory, writing it felt like surrender. Every letter of her name chipped at his authority. Every number screamed what he hadn't wanted. To admit that she had done what none of his men had ever achieved. Finally, with a grunt, he scrawled her name across the report. Alexandra Hayes, sniper. Confirmed. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. For the first time, Mallory wasn't angry at her. He was angry at himself for underestimating her, for letting pride blind him, and for nearly letting it cost them lives. The next morning, the unit gathered in the chow hall. The air was lighter than it had been in weeks. Laughter returned, boots scuffed on the dusty floor, and trays clattered as men swapped stories. Hayes sat at the edge of the table, as she always did. But now, instead of silence, men sat beside her willingly. Donnelly plopped down with a grin, sliding a tray toward her. "You eat yet? You're not skipping after last night." "Hell, you?" "Earned 2 breakfasts." She gave him a small smile, accepting the tray, but saying nothing. Across the table, one of the younger SEALs leaned forward. "How do you do it? Stay so calm?" "I'd be shaking so bad, I couldn't even pull the trigger." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. She looked at him, eyes steady. "I don't think about shaking. I think about breathing. One breath at a time. Everything else disappears." The table fell quiet, the men soaking in her words. For once, it wasn't Mallory they were learning from. It was her, and Mallory noticed. From across the hall, he watched the scene unfold, his jaw tight again. Not with anger this time, but with something heavier. He realized the truth he had fought so hard against. His men respected her not instead of him, but alongside him. The unit hadn't fractured under her rise. It had grown stronger. 2 days later, the base commander summoned Mallory to his office. The report of Hayes's kills had already reached higher ranks, traveling through the chain of command like wildfire. "Your sniper's making waves," the commander said, sliding the report across the desk. 29 confirmed? 12. In one engagement? That's not just impressive, it's historic. Mallory shifted uncomfortably. "She's skilled, sir." "No doubt about it, but skill can make men reckless." The commander arched an eyebrow. "Or it can save their lives." Which, from this report, it clearly has. You've got a soldier rewriting the rulebook under your command. Don't waste that with petty politics. Mallory bit back a retort. He knew better than to argue. But as he left the office, the words rang in his head. Don't waste that with petty politics. That night, Mallory found her where he always did alone, cleaning her rifle under the pale glow of a lantern. For a while, he just watched her. The meticulous way she handled every part, the quiet concentration etched into her face. Finally, he cleared his throat. "You did good," he said, his voice gruff. She looked up, surprised. "Sir? That mission?" "You did good." He paused, then added reluctantly, "Better than good." It was the closest thing to praise she had ever heard from him. And though it wasn't much, it was enough. She nodded once. "Thank you, sir." Mallory shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Just don't let it get to your head. Records don't mean a thing if you stop watching your back." "I know," she said simply. "Records don't matter to me. Lives do." The honesty in her tone struck him harder than any bullet. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that she wasn't chasing glory. She wasn't trying to undermine him. She was just doing her job, better than anyone expected. maybe even better than anyone else could. The weeks that followed cemented her place in the unit. Missions came and went, firefights erupted and subsided, and each time, Hayes was there calm, precise, unshakable. The men no longer questioned her. They sought her. They relied on her. And Mallory, though he rarely admitted it out loud, began to rely on her too. He gave her key overwatch positions without argument. He asked for her input in briefings, sometimes even deferring to her judgment when it came to sightlines or terrain. The change didn't go unnoticed. The men respected him for swallowing his pride, and they respected her for earning it. This unit, once divided, now moved like a single organism, every piece in sync. One evening, as the desert cooled under a blanket of stars, Donnelly leaned back against a Humvee, staring up at the sky. Alexandra sat nearby, scribbling in her journal. "You know," Donnelly said, "they're going to write about you one day. The girl sniper who made history. Hell, they'll probably make a movie." She chuckled softly, shaking her head. "I don't want a movie. I just want them to make it home." Donnelly studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That's why you're the best of us." She didn't answer. She just kept writing, her pen scratching quietly against the page. 31 confirmed. No losses today. Mallory trusted my call. On Overwatch. Progress. Her handwriting was small, almost clinical, but her words carried the weight of something larger. A legacy she never asked for, but was building anyway. For Mallory, the resolution came not in a single moment, but in many. Small ones. The first time he said her name without edge. The first time he thanked her directly in front of the men. The first time he realized that, in his gut, he trusted her as much as anyone he had ever led. He would never say it outright, not in grand speeches, not in glowing reports. That wasn't his way. But Alexandra Hayes no longer needed his validation. She had earned something greater, his trust. And in the desert, trust was everything. The war wasn't over. The missions didn't stop. The danger never left. But from that day forward, Alexandra was no longer the outsider, no longer the doubted. Rookie, no longer the female experiment in a man's world. She was the sniper who had carved her place in blood and dust. The sniper who had broken the commander's pride. The sniper who had broken the enemy's lines. The sniper who had broken every record. And yet, when she wrote in her journal under the dim glow of a lantern, her words remained the same as they always had. One breath, one shot, one life saved. That was her resolution. Not fame, not glory, just the unshakable will to protect. The desert winds had a way of carrying silence. Long after the firefights ended, long after the smoke cleared, the silence returned, an emptiness so vast it made even the fiercest battles feel like distant echoes. For Alexandra Hayes, that silence was both a comfort and a burden. Her name was no longer confined to whispers within the unit. It had traveled far beyond their dusty outpost, carried in reports, retold in meetings, passed from soldier to soldier. The sniper with 29 confirmed kills. The woman who broke every record. Some called her a pioneer. Others, a legend. But Alexandra herself didn't feel like a legend. She felt like a soldier. And soldiers carried ghosts. On quiet nights, when the camp settled and the stars sprawled across the Afghan sky, she wrote in her journal. Her entries were simple, almost clinical distances, wind speeds, positions, confirmed kills. But sometimes her pen hesitated. 32 confirmed. Northridge, moving target. The man looked younger than me. She stared at the words, pen trembling. Slightly. For every record she broke, there was a face she couldn't erase. She knew the necessity, the cost of hesitation. But necessity didn't erase memory. That was the truth no one celebrated in the stories. The men in her unit didn't see her hesitation. They only saw her composure, her precision, her unflinching calm. For them, she was more than a sniper. She was a shield. They trusted her eyes when their own blurred, trusted her aim when chaos swallowed their senses. Even Mallory, the man who had once mocked her, now deferred to her judgment in the field. He never admitted it outright, but his actions spoke for him. In briefings, he asked for her perspective. In firefights, his orders aligned with her calls. Trust had replaced doubt, and though pride still clung to him, he could no longer deny what she had become. But Alexandra never let it inflate her. She reminded herself with every breath, she was one mistake away from failure, and failure here meant death. The record came officially on a mission 3 weeks later. 4 more confirmed kills, bringing her total to 33. The report traveled upward like wildfire, reaching generals, advisors, even journalists hungry for stories. One evening, a visiting officer approached her in the mess hall. "Sergeant Hayes," he said with a smile, "you're making history out here. Do you realize that? The first woman sniper in active combat, and now the most successful one in the field. People back home need to hear this story." Alexandra looked at him, her spoon frozen halfway to her mouth. She didn't smile. "With respect, sir, people back home don't need stories. They need their sons and daughters alive. That's all that matters." The officer blinked, surprised, then nodded slowly. "Understood." But his eyes still carried the glint of a man already imagining headlines. When the story finally reached American soil, it spread fast. Military journals highlighted her record. News outlets debated the female sniper breaking barriers. Some praised her as a hero, a symbol of progress. Others questioned the morality of celebrating kill counts at all. Back in the desert, none of it mattered to Alexandra. She wasn't chasing headlines. She wasn't chasing glory. She was chasing survivalers and her teams. But she couldn't ignore what it meant to others. Letters began to arrive clumsy, heartfelt, sometimes messy. From young women who wrote, "You showed me we can do it too." From parents who wrote, "My son came home because of people like you." Each letter went into a small box she kept beside her journal. She never read them twice. Once was enough to know her story had rippled beyond her control. For Mallory, her legacy carried a different weight. He still carried pride like armor, still bristled when others praised her over him. But even he admitted, in a rare moment of candor, that she had saved more lives than anyone else under his command. One evening, as the unit prepared for yet another mission, he approached her quietly. "You've made your mark," he said, his voice low. "Don't let anyone use it to chain you down." She glanced at him, surprised. "Sir, they'll call you a symbol," he said. "They'll put you on posters, write stories, maybe even try to make you something you're not. Don't let them take away what you really are." "And what am I, sir?" His eyes met hers, steady for the first time. "A soldier, a damn good one. That's enough." As the months wore on, the weight of her kills pressed heavier. 33 became 36. 36 became 39. Each one necessary. Each one a thread in the fabric of survival. But in her journal, her tone began to shift. 36 confirmed. The team lived. But I wonder how many mothers will cry tonight on the other side. She knew better than to dwell on it in front of the men. For them, she was steel. But in the privacy of her journal, she was still human. And that, perhaps, was her true legacy. Not the record, not the headlines, not the numbers. But the fact that she carried it all and never let it break her. When her deployment ended, there was no parade, no banners. Just a dusty convoy carrying her and her brothers in arms back across the border. She left the desert the same way she had arrived, quiet, steady, rifle slung across her back. At the base stateside, she stepped off the transport plane and breathed air that smelled of grass instead of sand. Families cheered, men embraced their loved ones. Laughter echoed. Alexandra stood apart, watching, her duffel bag heavy at her. Sighed. Donnelly found her there, grinning as his kids wrapped themselves around his legs. "Don't go ghosting on us, Hayes," he called. "You're family now." She gave him a small smile. "Take care of them, Donnelly. That's what matters." Then she walked away, blending into the crowd. Years later, the legend of Alexandra Hayes lived on. Military academies told her story in lectures about perseverance and precision. Young recruits whispered her name during training. Women in uniform carried her as proof that the battlefield wasn't defined by gender, but by grit. But Alexandra herself lived quietly. She never chased the spotlight. She never wrote a book or gave a speech. She kept her journal, its pages filled with numbers, coordinates, and fragments of thoughts only she would ever read. One day, long after her boots had left the battlefield, she opened the box of letters again. She read them slowly, carefully, letting the words sink in. "You showed me we can do it too. My son came home because of people like you." For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. Her story wasn't just about the men she had killed. It was about the lives she had saved. Her legacy was not numbers. It was not records. It was not headlines. It was the steady breath before the shot. The calm voice overcomes. The trust she had earned when no one believed. The proof that courage wears no uniform, no gender, no face, but the human one. And as she closed her journal for the last time, Alexandra Hayes knew the truth she had carried all along. She hadn't broken records to be remembered. She had broken them so others could live. And that, in the end, was enough.